Hi, welcome to Give Me the Bible, where God's Word speaks for itself. As we continue our discussion about falsely framing the coronavirus situation, I've heard some suggest that if we allow people to stay at home and worship, and we tell people, kind of like I've been saying in the last few videos, that God is still pleased with our worship, even when we're at home by ourselves, people might abuse that. I mean, once this whole thing blows over and we come back together as a church like normal, what if people say, look, I'm just going to stay home and I'm not going to go to worship? I mean, after all, my worship is still pleasing to the Lord. I can still tune in to the live stream and worship from home just fine. And so some people are very hesitant to go down this road and to open this door to worshiping at home and telling people that's okay, because then it might be abused down the road. I understand that concern, but let me suggest to you three things we're going to need to be honest about. Number one, this is called the slippery slope argument, and it is actually a fallacy in logic. And one of the reasons it's a fallacy is because the abuse of a thing does not make the thing itself wrong. So, for instance, if our country said, look, in the United States, the democracy, all this freedom we have, maybe we shouldn't give people so much freedom because people abuse that freedom. People use their freedom to commit crimes, and so maybe we should start restricting people's freedom. Maybe freedom is a bad thing because of all the ways people abuse it. Well, that's not really a good argument, is it? Because just because somebody abuses freedom doesn't mean freedom is inherently a bad thing and that we shouldn't open the door to give people freedom. I mean, think about it from a spiritual perspective. God could have made that argument at the very beginning of creation. He could have said, look, I better not give these people free will because I know what's going to happen. They're going to fill the entire earth with sin, and so I'm just going to make them robots because free will is a bad thing. No. He could have said the same thing about grace. Oh man, if I give them grace and I offer them forgiveness of their sins, people are going to abuse grace. They're going to see grace as a license to sin. That's exactly what was happening in Romans chapter 6. And yet God didn't say grace is a bad thing, and I'm not going to even open that door to talk about grace, because then people are just going to take advantage of it. So we need to be very careful saying, I don't want to open this door of worshiping at home because people are going to abuse it, and therefore, worshiping at home, that's not acceptable and we can't do that. That's not a good argument. We need to be honest about that. Secondly, we need to be honest, and this is probably honesty on the part of the person who would actually abuse this situation in the future. We need to be honest and recognize this is not as good as meeting together in person. Look in 2 John. 2 John, there's only one chapter, so just look in verse 12. I love this verse. 2 John, verse 12. He says, though I have many things to write to you, I do not want to do so with paper and ink, but I hope to come to you and speak face to face so that your joy may be made full. John recognized, I could write more things to you, but getting a letter from me with things written on it is not the same as seeing me face to face and me seeing you face to face. Look in 1 Thessalonians 3. I'll give you another example of this. Paul, he was forced to leave Thessalonica very soon after he established the church there because of persecution. And so he was really concerned about how they were doing, and so he sent Timothy back to them to check on them while Paul was continuing his work in the city of Athens. And so listen to what he says when Timothy comes back. 1 Thessalonians 3 verse 6, but now that Timothy has come to us from you and has brought us good news of your faith and love, and that you always think kindly of us, longing to see us, just as we also long to see you. They had this longing to see each other. And yes, he sent Timothy to check on them. That's not the same. He wanted to be there with them in Philippians. He says the same thing in Philippians 4:1. He longs to see his brethren because he was stuck in prison and he couldn't be with the Philippian brethren. And just think about that in all of our relationships. I dated a girl one time from a different state. It was just really hard. I mean, we did meet virtually. We even had virtual dinner dates, and we would get on our laptops and video conference and eat together and all, and that was nice, but it wasn't the same. And a lot of people will tell you long distance relationships, they're very, very hard to work out because it's not the same as being there face to face. Bring this to an even grander scale. The reason heaven is going to be so amazing is because, as Revelation 22 says, we're going to see God's face. Right now, yeah, we have a relationship with God, but it's only through prayer, and we can't really see Him, and it's great, and it's, prayer is helpful, and I don't want to minimize prayer, but man, once we're standing in His presence and we get to see Him face to face, there's going to be nothing like that in the world. So if you're a person who maybe has been watching my videos, the last 3, talking about how worship at home can still be pleasing to God and all that, and you think, well, once we start worshiping, I'm just going to stay home because it's more comfortable. Oh, man, you don't understand God's plan for you. You don't understand the beauty and the power of face-to-face relationships. Just try, if you're married, to have a virtual relationship with your wife. Just doesn't work the same. You gotta be together. And that's why God designed local churches, because He knew what we need as humans. He knew what we need as Christians. We need to be together, to embrace each other, to give each other that holy kiss, that holy handshake, to put our hand on each other's shoulders when we're down, and to lift each other up and encourage one another. We just don't get that the same way when we stay home. And let me just say this final thing we need to be honest about. Be honest about how ridiculous it is to turn an exception into a rule. Let's say you get sick, and it doesn't have to be the coronavirus. Let's just say, pneumonia, some random time during the year, and you have to miss services for 2 weeks. And you say to yourself, well, hey, I had to miss services for 2 weeks, and I was able to still please God even though I wasn't in the assembly. Therefore, that must mean I can still continue to please God by staying home from the assembly. No. Why is that? Because that was an exception. That is not the ideal situation. It's not that if you stay home with pneumonia, your worship is not pleasing to God. He understands when you can't be in worship. But to then turn that into the rule and to say, oh, well, if God accepts me when I'm home when I have pneumonia, well, then God's going to accept me at home when I'm fully well. No, that's a horrible comparison to make, because that's not the ideal. The ideal is to be with our brethren in local churches. That's why we have letters like Philippians and Thessalonians and Romans, because these were churches in individual locations. If Paul had to write individual letters to each individual Christian staying off by themselves in individual homes, the New Testament would be huge. We'd have, 7,000 books in the New Testament. But he wrote to groups of people meeting together in these locations, in these particular cities, because that's God's plan for His church. And if after all this blows over, you think, I don't really care about God's plan for the church, I'm going to stay home by myself, God is not going to be pleased with you. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you so much for your interest in spiritual things. I understand the fears and the concerns about the slippery slope. But if we really understand God's plan for us, we won't be so afraid of that anymore. Thank you so much, and Lord willing, I'll see you in the next video.